welcome everybody to the second session this week on creating a killer CV and acing application forms. This is the third week of our webinar series. They seem to be flying by now. This week is a little bit different in that Helen is presenting and I am on the questions. So I'll explain, or Helen might have to explain how that works in a moment. So this one, as we say, fits in to the wider series of 8 modules that we have. So Helen, if you can just knock the slide over. So this is obviously week 3, fits into the 8. So every week, if you haven't joined us before, we are running 3 of that week's topic, with a bonus session on assessment centres on Fridays, because we think that some of you might be doing assessment centres right now, virtual assessment centres. So we're running those. So if you haven't already signed up for all the ones that you want to, you can go back in and you can adjust your preferences and sign up for some of the other ones. We have got the first 2 sessions, so finding your strengths and the job search, uploaded to our YouTube channel. We'll show you the link for that at the end of the slides. So if you've missed out on those or you want to go back and have another look at them, then you can do. So what's on the agenda? Oh, no, not on the agenda for today. So in terms of getting the most from these webinars, be present and participate. So as I said, I am on questions today. So if you've got any questions, I will be answering those on the chat box as we go through. So it's the chat box that we use for those, isn't it, Helen?
Yeah, so if you ignore the Q&A function and just use Zoom chat, and if you could set it so that it says to all panelists and participants rather than just to the panelists, because it would be great if everyone could see your questions and our responses to them. That'd be much appreciated.
That's great, Helen. So I'll answer those in real time, but what we will do, which worked really well on Monday, is at the very end of the webinar, we will have a bit of a Q&A session at that point. So if there's any questions at the end that you think of, or you want to save them to the end because you're really concentrating on the content, then there will be time then. So if you don't want to stay for that, you can log off. But that will be right at the very, very end, and we'll do a bit of a summary of the questions that have come up this time. Please do ask questions. We've had so many questions on the last few that we've done. It's been really, really great to see so many questions. So please do ask away. As with all of the other webinars, we will be trying to relate what we're doing to what's going on in the environment. So at any point there's anything relevant to what's happening, we will be doing that. But if you've got any questions about anything, just chuck them into the chat box. If you can mute your phones as well so that you're not distracted by any notifications, that would be cool. And also, as always, make use of the tools that are available. So we will list some resources that we are giving you as part of this topic, and we'll go through those at the end of the webinar and probably refer to them at some point within them as well. So we will give you access to some of our free templates and some tools, and also a resource that we will mention time and time again, and I don't apologise for this at all, is the career service. So you've all hopefully got access to fantastic career services who are all adapting their content to be online now. So please, if you haven't already, do go and talk to them and see what they are offering. Okay, so some quick intros. So if you've been on the webinars before, you'll know me. I'm Sophie, I'm MD at SRS. We work with employers and universities, so in the graduate recruitment space. So for employers, we design their assessment materials and help them to do the recruiting of their graduates. And we work with universities to embed employability, usually by running large-scale assessment centres. And I also wrote the book From Learner to Earner, which this webinar series is based on. So that's me, Helen.
Thanks very much, Sophie. Yeah, I'm Helen, so I'm the University Partnerships Manager at SRS, and I work with Sophie to help deliver a lot of assessment centre simulations for students so they're better prepared for the recruitment process. And we know how tough it is out there at the moment for you guys, which is why we're running these webinars to help share that extra knowledge and to help give you the edge going forward. So hopefully you'll find them useful. And as I say, please do ask lots of questions. Keep us busy. Okay, so today's agenda, you'll see that we're going to cover, does your CV include the right things? How do you write a great cover letter? And what makes a good application form? There will be a lot of hints and tips that we'll share that will be applicable to all industries, but we will mainly be looking at this from the perspective of a UK employer. So your CV is usually your first opportunity to make an impact. On average, how much time do you think an employer spends reading a CV? It's quite a scary answer. It's only 6.25 seconds on average, and it's even less if it doesn't grab their attention. How many graduate CVs do you think get rejected? So it's about 50%. So it can be quite demoralising at this stage if you've applied for a few positions and you haven't got past that CV stage. But hopefully in this webinar, we'll give you some tips to achieve that. How many applications does the average firm receive for graduate positions? So the answer to this is about 2,000, with at least 50 per actual position. So there's a lot of competition out there, which I'm sure you guys are aware of. Therefore, you can see how important it is to have a really good CV, and I'll go on to talk about how you can get the basics just right. So before we go into any kind of detail, I do want to start by drawing your attention to probably the most important point. So for every different organisation and job you apply to, you must tailor and change your CV to reflect this. So creating a CV is definitely not a one-off exercise, and employers will be looking to see that you've understood the job requirements and that you've matched this to the experiences in your CV. It should be really clear that you want to work for them and not just any organisation. So there are lots of different types of CV and formats that you can use, and it is sometimes appropriate to think outside the box, particularly if you're going for a specific role in the creative industry, for example. I know I've heard about CVs that have been printed on cereal boxes and shoe boxes and t-shirts, and that has worked in some cases, but on the norm, I think it's good to stick to a more traditional format for your usual corporate employer. But regardless of what format you decide to use, the main thing is that your CV reflects your professional identity and that it's relevant to that particular job. So you'll see on the screen, there's some hints and tips with regards to general layout and presentation. Now, the ones I would particularly pull out are the following. Aim to have 2 full pages for your CV. 1 page is too short, and it can indicate a lack of experience or a lack of thought that has gone into putting the CV together. More than 2 pages is too long. You need to remember how many CVs that recruiter is having to look at and that they're only spending 6.25 seconds looking at them. Make it easy for the recruiter to read and review your CV. So rather than long paragraphs and small text, use an appropriate font and break up your content with bullet points and subheadings. And definitely get someone to proofread it. When you've been working on your CV for so long, sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees, and a fresh pair of eyes is going to pick up on that bad spelling, bad formatting, and whether or not it all makes sense. So I'm still amazed actually at the amount of obvious mistakes that I pick up in CVs for real jobs. And it's very clear to me that they haven't used spell check and that they haven't asked anyone to read it. It's a very, very quick thing for you to do. So with regards to personal details, these generally need to go at the top of your CV, and it needs to include all of your contact details, such as your email address and your phone number. Now, you don't need to include things like your date of birth, your nationality, marital status or passport number, things like that. And for most UK jobs, it's not advisable to include a photo. Moving on to the personal profile, or personal statement as it's sometimes known. For me, and for a lot of employers, it's probably the most important part of your CV. It will be the first thing that the recruiters will read, and therefore it really needs to grab their attention. It should be a short summary, providing an overview of who you are, what skills and experience you can bring to the role, and why you want to work for them. So let's have a look at a couple of examples. So you can see here, we've got an example of a real personal statement that I pulled from a CV a few years back. I'm a dynamic, passionate, enthusiastic student. I'm also a great team leader and team player. I am looking for a graduate job that will help me to develop my skills further. Now, this is a bit too brief. It doesn't actually say anything either. It's all very vague. So it's got some buzzwords in there, like team leader and team player, but there's no real evidence to back it up. It's really quite wishy-washy. Moving on to another example, I am a final year student on track for a strong 2-1 in accounting at the University of Liverpool. My passion for a career in finance was ignited following my work experience at a local accountancy firm and nurtured through several relevant internships. The strong leadership skills developed through my extracurricular activities, treasurer of the Business Society and vice captain of the rugby team, make me a strong candidate for a role in the KPMG graduate scheme. Now, this is a really strong profile. It's clear who the candidate is, and their passion appears much more genuine. It's backed up with relevant evidence to support their aim. They've also tailored their profile to the application and included skills which would be attractive to an employer like KPMG. So when I've read a lot of personal statements over the years, I have actually read some very good ones that have been backed up with experience and skills, but very rarely do they actually mention the employer that they're applying to, and this is something that employers will look for. Moving on to employment history. So ideally, this section should include all your paid jobs and your work experience. Although if you do have a lot, you might want to prioritise the most relevant. Make sure you start with the most recent role first and include job titles, organisation names, dates employed, and key responsibilities. There's no need, in fact, you shouldn't include details of your salary, your reasons for leaving, or the contact details of your employer. It's just not necessary. Within your work experience, you do want to highlight your achievements and use quantitative data wherever possible. So for example, if you're working on the food service counter at Tesco's, you might be able to include the fact that you increased sales on the counter by 10%, or that you achieved 3rd place in a retail competition, things like that. Anything with hard data really helps. When talking about your responsibilities as well, link them to key skills that are required by the employer. So if you can say that you have demonstrated problem solving within your role, and that's something they're looking for on the job description, again, that's going to stand out. You might think some of your work experience isn't relevant, but as long as you draw attention to those transferable skills, you should include all of your part-time, your temporary and your voluntary work, as long as you draw those skills out from it. Moving on to look at education and qualifications. So you do need to include details of your education, and you want to include the dates and the types. Now, if you have a lot of work experience, it may not be necessary to go as far back as your secondary education. You just want to pull out the key headlines from your most recent qualifications. But think about how you lay out this section, because rather than a long list of subjects and results, try and condense it into a summary that could be like 4 GCSEs at grade A, 2 at grade B, and so on, because this means that you'll have a lot more room on your CV for other more important things, like your work experience and like your skills. Also, rather than just a list of qualifications, think about highlighting what you've learned from your education, because this section gives you another opportunity to draw out those soft skills. So think about what you've learned when you've been doing your modules, how you've developed your teamwork skills by doing module projects, how you've become better at presenting because you had to present some key results, things like that. Carry on drawing out those transferable skills. Skills and achievements. So this isn't compulsory, but it certainly helps to make you stand out when you have a section focused on your skills. So along with the rest of your CV, this section needs to be tailored to the specific job you're applying for. Now, you should start by reviewing the job description and identifying 5 to 6 key skills that they're looking for. And you might want to order them in level of importance so that you're addressing the most important ones they want first. Anyone can make up a list of skills and put this in the CV. And again, it's something I continue to be surprised by when looking at CVs. Someone just listed a set of key buzzwords: team player, team leader, presentation skills. Anyone can write a list. You need to give strong and specific examples for each of those skills. And remember, when you're doing that, you can draw from your education, your work experience, extracurricular activities. The more relevant and unique, the better. Moving on to look at personal interests or extracurricular activities. Now, it is good to include these, but only if you can show how they're relevant to the role. So, for example, if you're going to mention about travelling around the world, that's fine, but link this to how you had to be organised, plan the details, things like that. So again, it's about pulling those skills out. Things such as socialising with friends or going to the cinema, they don't really add anything of value, so I wouldn't include that. Alternatively, some other examples, if you're in a football team, you could talk about how you show teamwork, or if you're a member of the debating society, how you take account of other people's views. There's lots of things that you can draw those skills out of. One that commonly comes up, I've noticed for students and graduates, is the Duke of Edinburgh Award, and that's often just listed as achieved Duke of Edinburgh Award, and they don't give any more detail around what was involved, what skills they learned, and that's a real opportunity to get hold of that and talk about what you learned from it. So references, there's no need to include the full details of your reference on your CV because you want to use that space for more valuable information, so things around your skills and your work experience. All you need is a simple statement at the end of those 2 pages, just saying references available on request. That's all that's required, because if they do want references, they'll approach you for that at a later date. So in summary, our top tips for a great CV. Firstly, going back to that original point, tailor the content each time you apply for a job. I can't stress that enough. Make sure your CV is an honest reflection of you and your experiences, otherwise you will get found out later in the process. You want to highlight relevant skills and achievements throughout your CV. Ensure your CV grabs the reader's attention, and that's helped by leading with a great opening personal statement, that really important part. Check that the formatting is consistent and that you've made the best use of those 2 pages. And again, going back to that point, get someone to check and proofread your CV and really take advantage of your career service in this respect, because that's certainly what they're there for, to help check your CV and give you some feedback, give you some pointers going forward. The pre-task for this webinar was to review your own CV, and hopefully you can go back to your points and review them in light of the best practice we have shared today. I'm going to show you a short video now from Helen Gates, who provides her insight into the most important points. So Helen has helped to screen and assess a lot of candidates for graduate employers, and she also helps to support our assessment centre simulations. So let's see what she has to say.
Hi, my name's Helen Gates and I'm one of the assessors for Smart Resourcing. One of the most important things about writing a really good CV is that you showcase your skills and abilities, no matter where these have come from, and that you really make sure that these match up with the job description for the role that you're applying for. Have a good look at that job description before you do your CV, and then you'll know the key skills and abilities that they're looking for. Then you can try and see where these match the skills you've got and how you can explain them in the context in which you've developed them. This might be from your professional working jobs, from internships, from volunteering, sport, interests, every area of your life. You can bring these skills into the forefront and make them a really good match for the role. In this way, you make it really easy for the reader to understand who you are, what you're bringing to the table, and how they can easily match it up to the role. Don't lead them on a wild treasure hunt, but bring them your pure gold. Show them your skills, your abilities, and the results that you've got from having developed them over time.
Okay, thanks very much from Helen there. So we're going to move on to cover letters now. So your cover letter is a really important tool. It's usually sent out to employers along with your CV. Now, it's one of the easiest and most effective ways to stand out from the crowd, and it brings to the table a little extra information about you and what you can offer the organisation. Now, before we go into any hints and tips, I'd like you to take a couple of minutes to read through the following example cover letter. Now, for the purpose of this webinar, I have left off contact details so that it fits better on the screen, but usually you would have your personal details, the address of the organisation, and the date you sent the letter at the top. So we'll just take a couple of moments to read through that. Okay, so I appreciate you might have only been able to skim read that, and that's fine. Just want to talk about what's good about this letter. So overall, it's easy to read and review. There's no long, heavy paragraphs, and it fits on one page. It's also very well structured. So you've got a distinct paragraph showing why they want to work for the organisation, and a distinct paragraph that focuses on their skills and experience. In particular, it's got a great opening summary, which clarifies what they are applying for, specifically mentions the organisation, and highlights key experience. So this instantly grabs the attention of the reader because it's a unique opening. Following on from this, the second paragraph draws attention to their interaction with Unilever and the research they have done. And it's great if you can say you've attended one of the employers' events or workshops or spoken to some of their employees. Now, if you can't say this, then at least take the time to really research them online. So a lot of candidates respond with the same headline information when they're talking about why they want to work for the employer. And it tends to be a key headline that they've just taken from the homepage. It's always good to delve a bit deeper, as this will show your enthusiasm much better. So what could be better about this letter? So first off, I hope you guys spotted it. There are spelling mistakes, and even Unilever has been spelt wrong in the second paragraph. This really looks lazy, as it shows that you haven't used a spell check and you haven't asked someone else to proofread your letter. Secondly, in the second paragraph, they've listed some key skills, which is great, but they haven't given specific examples of most of these. And going back to that point around anyone can write a list of skills or buzzwords, the key is to show examples of them and how they will be a benefit to the role. So for example, you could say something like, as a football coach, I had to have many challenging conversations with my peers, which would be helpful when negotiating with clients at Unilever, something like that. Now, clearly you haven't got room in your cover letter to give examples for every skill, so just pick a couple of the most relevant or important ones to respond to. When drawing attention to your experience as well, try to use unique examples, things from your employment or your extracurricular activities. Now, your degree is clearly relevant, but remember, you'll be applying alongside a lot of other students and graduates who've all got degrees and they've all completed module projects. So you want to try and stand out in this cover letter. And finally, you can see at the end there, the letter closes with, I would appreciate hearing from me within the next 7 days. So you should close with a summary of your interest in the job and definitely not put pressure on the employer to come back to you within a timescale. Okay. So moving on to some overall top tips for cover letters. It's often best to use a traditional format and layout with their address and yours at the top, along with the date you sent the letter. I wouldn't be tempted to use fancy fonts, borders, colour, or big headings. And you should also try and find out the hiring manager's name so that you can write to them personally rather than dear sir or madam. Secondly, make it easy to read and review. Think about how many cover letters the recruiter is having to read. Stick to one page and have manageable sized paragraphs. There should be a clear structure based around an opening introduction, a section on why you want to work for them, a section on what you can bring to the role, and a closing summary. That's your rough guide, your rough layout. And as we talked about in the last example cover letter, really research the company and show your enthusiasm. Typically, there should be one paragraph that's dedicated to this. Highlight your skills and experience. So prioritise your greatest achievements or your most relevant roles. Give those specific examples and link it back to how it would be useful to them. And finally, it's probably a good idea to try and showcase your personality by using those unique examples. You might want to mention what drives you or what you want to develop as part of the role. Those things really help. And again, as with the CV, make sure you get someone to check your letter for things such as spelling and grammar. Always, always do that. So moving on to application forms. So the length of the recruitment process can be very daunting, and it could be that you have to submit a CV, a cover letter, and an application form. If this is the case, try not to duplicate the same content word for word across the 3 documents. You'd be surprised how many people do this, where they've answered a question in the application form and literally just copied and pasted it into the cover letter. That looks really lazy. Definitely avoid that. We're going to start by looking at some top tips with regards to application forms. So firstly, make sure you read and follow all the instructions. And if you can, review the whole application before making a start. You want to answer every question fully and make full use of the word count to get the maximum score for each question. So for example, if you're given 200 words to answer, you should be writing between 180 to 200 words. If your answers are too short, if they're just a couple of lines, sometimes employers will just outright disregard them. Make sure all your details are correct, such as your contact information and dates of your employment. And for your work experience, you want to provide a consistent level of detail. And again, use this as another opportunity to highlight those key skills alongside your responsibilities. If there is a section for additional information, never leave this blank. Try and include something extra of relevance or value that you couldn't mention or cover in previous questions. As always, back to that same point, proofread your application thoroughly, checking your spelling and your grammar before you submit it. And finally, use the STAR technique, and we're going to go on to talk about that shortly in a bit more detail. Before we go on to talk about typical questions and those that are questions that are asked around competencies and skills, I want to draw your attention to a commonly asked question like the one on the screen. Explain your motivation for applying to our organisation, highlighting the skills and experience that make you a strong candidate. Now, this is a really important question, and here is an example of a weak response. I have excellent verbal communication skills. At the same time, I know how to strengthen my relationships with colleagues and customers. As you can see from my CV, I also have great experience in business operations. I would enjoy creating business plans and updating financial records to support the business. Now, this is a weak response because for these types of questions, you need to make it clear why you specifically want to work for them and not some other organisation. Use your answer as an opportunity to show off your research again. And as we've mentioned before, don't just list skills, provide further specific examples and don't rely on your CV to fill in the gaps. I'm going to hand you over to Sophie now, who's going to talk through the STAR technique with you. For those of you who've got questions while this is happening, as I say, we will be doing a Q&A summary at the end. You okay, Sophie?
Trying to find the unmute button there. Yeah, God, you kept me busy on the questions, so that's been great. So yeah, we're going to talk about the STAR technique in a bit more detail. Actually, someone in the question box did refer to the STAR technique, which was interesting, although it was in relation to CVs, but I think it tends to fit better with application forms and also with interviews, whether that's video, telephone or face-to-face. And some of you will have come across the STAR technique before, possibly at university, but you might have seen it without the extra R. And we like to add that on because we think it just adds a little bit more. And if you're using this in the context of an application form, by following this technique and structuring your response to fit the STAR model, what you'll find is that it naturally helps you use the word count that you've been allocated, but also the structure of your response. We know as employers, having screened application forms before, that by following this technique, you will be able to provide the criteria that the employer is looking for because you'll have ticked off certain things that they're after. So we will be sending you out the slides as a recording after the webinar, so you will be able to come back and have a look at this, and there's loads of stuff online about the STAR technique as well. But just to kind of briefly go through it, you would start your response off with your situation and then follow the model through. So just as an example of something that you might want to talk about. So say you were asked to give an example on an application form of a time when you've worked under pressure. So you could talk about working in a fast food restaurant, for example. So let's just use McDonald's as the example. So the situation would be, I had a part-time job at McDonald's where I worked late nights and weekends while I was at college. That could be the situation. The task might be that you normally worked on the tills, that was your role, but in this particular situation, in this particular task, the situation was that you had 5 people that had rung in sick for the shift that day, and you needed to work more effectively with the rest of your team members. So the action that you took was that you took the initiative to stagger breaks between the teams so that you were all available at the most busiest point of the day, and you were all flexible in working in different areas of the restaurant to make sure that when someone was particularly busy, they were getting more help, for example. The result was that although it was busy and you were under a huge amount of pressure because you were a smaller team than normal, all of the customers were served in a reasonable time. They didn't disappear, you didn't lose anyone, and all your colleagues were really upbeat because you'd worked together and no one felt under too much pressure. So that might be the result. The reflection, so that what next, that other bit, could be that on reflection, actually it highlighted that it would be really helpful if every team member had training in every specific area of the restaurant so that it was easier to cover for each other if that situation was to happen again. So that's just a really basic example there. I'm sure you'll have your own work experience that you can use to relate to that, or if you don't have work experience, it might be that you use a university or course example or something from one of your hobbies and interests. Okay.
Do we want to cover off what's coming next and the resources that we sent out to you before moving on to an overall Q&A session where we'll summarise some of the questions and responses we've had?
Yes, let's do that. So that does bring us to the end of today's content. So next week, we will be covering online tests. So we'll be talking about the different types of tests there are, what to expect and how to practice. And online tests is a really frustrating stage for many in the recruitment process because it's quite often a stage that people fail at. So, and you quite often don't get any feedback about where you've gone wrong with that. So we will do our best to explain how it all works and how you can have your best chance at beating that stage. Okay, so a few bits and pieces that I'm just going to cover with you, then I'm going to go back to questions and just answer the last few that have come through there along with a bit of a summary. But just before anyone that doesn't want to stay for questions wants to log off, I just want to cover a few little bits with you there. So we are sending out with the recording of today's webinar a CV template. This will answer many of the questions that have come up in the chat box around how to lay out your CV. It will help you stick to the 2 pages as well. And if you don't have enough content to fill 2 pages, don't feel like you have to stretch it out. You can have something that's a page and a half or even a page I've seen before. So, and it will grow, once you've got more experience. We'll also send you out a cover letter template that you can use that can be adapted. You can use that as either an actual formal letter, or you can adapt it and use it as an email. Your career service, if you haven't already spoken to them, then please do that. There's a link there to the book, which I've mentioned the webinar series is based on. I've also got the link to our YouTube channel. So if you've missed any of the previous webinars, you can go there. We upload one of the webinars each week on there. So if you sign up, subscribe, then you'll get the alerts as to when we release those. And then finally, just on there, we've got the Student Sessions podcast, which one of our previous guests on the webinars has released. And this is an employability podcast, so worth checking out. Helen, can you just flick to the last slide and then we'll cover these questions. So we're a social bunch. We love to chat on social media. If you're not following us, then please choose your preferred channel. We'd love to connect with you. Do connect with us. We're using the hashtag #LockdownYourCareer. We'd love to hear your questions and feedback. And actually, you will be directed to a very, very short anonymous survey after this webinar, and you'll be sent the link out with the notes and things as well. We'd love to get your feedback. Some of the feedback that we've had has been really useful and it's been really encouraging as well. So any feedback would be hugely appreciated. Like I say, it's anonymous and it takes less than 2 minutes. So that's that. Just back to the questions. We've had so many questions.
That's great.
I've tried to keep on top of them, and also I apologise if I've made any typos, but let me just go back to, I mean, I have answered everything and we can do some summaries, but there's quite a few more that have just come through. Yeah. So questions. First one there about, does COVID-19 reduce the chance to be recruited? I'm going to come back to that one because I'm going to ask Helen to answer that one. And then I'm just going to whiz through some quicker ones. So is a personal statement the same as a cover letter? No, so the personal statement or personal profile at the top of your CV is just 3 to 4 lines, so it's briefer than a cover letter. When you see our templates, that will help you to understand the difference between the two. This is good. Okay, so someone's saying it's good timing as they're applying for an NHS job. Fantastic. So definitely use all the resources and take advantage of all the information we're giving. Someone's asking, saying they weren't able to attend the first session. Are there any resources you were sending out that you could send as well? There are resources for all of them. If you drop us a note at the enquiries email address, then we can send anything out that you've missed, and you'll see that at the end of that webinar. Someone's saying, I feel as if I was let down by my previous employment for training and feel it reflects my CV. Anything I can do to combat this? Okay, so if you haven't had any formal training in a previous job, you will have had lots of on-the-job training. You'll have learned things from doing the job. So definitely make sure that you highlight those skills, Jill. The other thing is that now is actually a great time to do any training. There's loads of people that are offering free online courses at the moment. So if there's anything that you can try and do short term that you think would help in terms of training, then now's a great time to do it. But remember, you'll have transferable skills from that job, and obviously you'll have, you know, qualifications from elsewhere. Susie's asking if age is a disadvantage for graduate roles, as she's a mature student. No, not at all. I mean, I used to be head of graduate recruitment at John Lewis, and we used to get loads of mature students that applied for our programs. You know, there's age discrimination laws that mean that you can apply for any role. So, you know, you're still a graduate. It doesn't matter what age you are. And we certainly didn't find it a barrier at all. So don't let that put you off. The only thing that might put you off is the fact that an entry-level graduate role will be a lower salary than probably what you might want to go for, but that would be the only thing. So, how do you make a barista experience relevant to an NHS healthcare assistant? Well, I'm sure there'll be some fantastic customer service examples that you've got. So communicating with people, which would be very relevant in both roles, but there will, and also working with a team. There'll be loads of things. Everything will have transferable skills. Someone else, Ahmed, asking about a visa sponsorship. Should you mention that? Yes, you should. You should be upfront about that and work with the employer to see if you're still able to apply for that position, if they can support you. Someone's asking what the enquiries email address is. I'm just going to type that in just so that
I've already put that in, Sophie.
Oh, have you? Oh, get you. Fancy. Right, fabs, you've got that. Any advice on international students? I would say definitely talk to your career service, because they will have the most up-to-date information, and they might be able to advise around visas, but employers should have that as well. So do speak to them, because there'll be different things that apply to different industries. How do you relate working in a restaurant to wanting to work in law? Well, you couldn't necessarily relate the experience directly to law, but your question there, you will have transferable skills because you'll have still done all the teamwork, working under pressure, all sorts of things. But actually, the question more that you're asking there more relates to your motivation. So if you're now saying that you want to work in law, then you will have a load of reasons, Vanessa, as to why you want to work in law. So have a think about what they are and what is it that's attracting you to law, and just be honest about those. That doesn't have to relate to your previous work experience. Helen, can you give us a bit of an update about what's happening in terms of recruitment right now in terms of COVID?
Yeah, so I'm sure you guys are aware. I'm going to be honest. The amount of roles that organisations are recruiting for has taken a hit, hopefully just for the short term. And these next few weeks are going to be quite critical, because there's still a lot of businesses that are waiting to see what happens in the next few weeks around government legislation and lockdown and all of that. So I'd encourage you all, for any particular organisations that you're interested in or a particular industry, stay close to it and put in the time to do the research around what those organisations are planning for the upcoming months with regards to their recruitment and work experience and so on. What I would say is there's a lot of positive stuff going on out there. Although the amount of roles being advertised has probably reduced, a lot of the firms still are recruiting, certainly the bigger ones. And I've actually spoken to a few in the last couple of weeks, like KPMG and PwC, who are still going ahead with their recruitment. And some of the SMEs, some of the smaller enterprises are still aiming to recruit as well. It's been quite, they put a lot of their recruitment online now, so it's a lot around virtual assessment centres where it was the in-person events before, and there's a webinar that where we look at that and how you can better prepare for them. But yeah, there are still opportunities out there. It just might take you that bit more time and research to pin them down. I'd also recommend that you be a bit more open-minded. So you might have had a specific role, a specific organisation in mind, but you may need to broaden that search a bit more now and look at other industries and other roles. That some of the choice may have been taken away from you, but there's still a lot within your control in terms of what you can apply for at this time. There's a lot of questions I'm seeing at the end here around.
I know, I was just going to pick those up. I mean, I would just add to what Helen said there is that, you know, we do know it's a tough time, but, you know, employers are still recruiting.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're showing that you're interested in looking for a job will put you in advantage to other students, because there'll be some students and graduates that have given up and don't even apply for stuff, not even looking. So you've already got the mindset, you know, with the fact that you're engaging and you're trying to do something to equip yourselves. And the other thing is that the recruitment market always bounces back, and the graduate market in particular is one that bounces back sooner than others. So you've got to just stay positive. You won't get anything if you don't apply for it, so you've got to just go for it. So just the last few questions there. Do university careers teams work with students once they've graduated? Most of them do, so you can talk to yours. It's usually 2 or 3 years, I think, after you've graduated, but some of them will be more flexible than that. I'm sure that they would want to support you if you're a previous graduate, so definitely go and talk to them. Where do we mention that we need visa sponsorship? So it will usually ask you in the early part of the application form about whether you've got the right to work in the UK, and you'll usually be able to tick something in there, or there'll be an additional information box either there or a bit further down. So there will be opportunities for you to highlight any visa requirements within the application form. And if there isn't, then they'll have a contact email, so you could just drop them a note and ask them.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Just,
well,
Sophie, just to add at the end there, just my final thought with regards to what's going on at the moment with the pandemic. Just try and be as proactive as you can, as productive as you can with the time you've got now, because some employers are actually intimating that they're going to be asking questions of the candidates of what they did during the pandemic, how they used the time. They might even throw in some interview questions to kind of test your resilience, your adaptability around what you did in this period. So think about, as I say, what Sophie said about doing some online courses. A lot of them are free at the moment. Think about some key worker roles you can get involved in, voluntary work, and how you can really give yourself the edge by showing what you did within this time.
That's a great point. Great examples around resilience are available right now. And that's, if you've joined us on one of the previous webinars, we talked about resilience being a skill that employers said was most commonly lacking in graduates. Well, if now's not the time to develop your resilience skills, I don't know when ever will be. So, you know, make the most of it and think about your examples and just try and stay positive. Things will improve in that sense for sure. Great. Well, thank you so much for all your questions. You've kept me busy typing away. I've really enjoyed being on questions today, and we hope to see you on a future webinar. Please do fill out our survey. We'd love to engage with you. We'd love to connect with you on social, or follow the YouTube channel. And yeah, we hope to see you again.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.